All right, welcome to Wrestling Rehab. Shout outs to all my wrestling junkies out there. You know you are a wrestling junkie. That's why you're at the right place, Wrestling Rehab. And today, guys, I want to go ahead and ask you guys a question and just talk a little bit about a certain main event that took place at a WrestleMania that holds nice and dear in my heart, man, because this main event, I believe, stands out on its own. Now, I'm not talking about the in-ring performance because the in-ring performance is not that great, but I do want to talk about just how the wrestling, what we call today the WWE universe, back then it was known as the WWF, just how the fan base reacted to this main event. So let's go ahead and let's get into it real quick, all right? First, let's introduce one of the guys in the main event. Of course, we're talking about Terry Bollea, okay, also known as the immortal Hulk Hogan. Now, Hulk Hogan came into the WWF in 1983, and it was just almost like a year later, maybe a little before a year. It was in 1984 that he became champion, the WWF champion. There was no two champions back then. There was only one. And he became champion, beating the Iron Sheik. Immediately, guys, the fan base just started gravitating towards Hulk Hogan. He was a big guy. You know, you guys see right here the 18-inch pythons, right? Say your prayers, take your vitamins. You know, that was the guy he was. He was known for coming in and ripping his shirt off. Very patriotic guy, very American guy. And you know what? It was kind of a superhero to kids, right? And to adults, he was kind of just like that all-American patriotic guy, right? He just walk in, tear his shirt off, and he's champion, and he's doing his thing. Huge guy. I think he was like 6'6", and I was part of the Hulkamania group as well. I was a big fan of his. He was the man. The thing is, he was so much larger than life in the wrestling world. He became the guy that there was really little to no competition out there for him. Now, we can talk about that there was somebody by the name of the Macho Man Randy Savage that went ahead and had a program with him and some stories with him, but we're not here to talk about that. We'll save that for another video. Instead, I want to talk about the main event that I'm actually talking about. And in 1987, James Hellwig, also known as the Ultimate Warrior, came in and started doing his thing. And in 1987, the same year that he came in, he became the Intercontinental Champion. And immediately, he just blew up. I mean, with his face paint, with his crazy hair, he would talk like a monster, right? He wasn't talking just normally, cutting promos like that. You know, he was talking just almost like a monster. You couldn't even really understand. He was doing the snap it to the Slim Jim, the don't smoke, all that kind of stuff, right? He was also a big guy, just like the immortal Hulk Hogan. But he didn't really, you know, talk much about his pythons or anything like that. And in those days, you couldn't be a little guy, right? Today's a little bit different, but in those days, they just wanted big dudes, man, just huge bodybuilding type of guys. And he'd run into the ring and he'd be shaking the rope and hyping everybody up and doing their thing, right? And at some point, these two guys were going to have to meet in the ring. The problem was that both of these guys were baby faces, and none of these guys could drop the title, because if they drop the title, that's going to take stock away from them. And there was really nobody to take the title from them. These two guys were just building and building and building. Hulk Hogan building as WWF champion, the Ultimate Warrior building as Intercontinental champion. Now, at WrestleMania VI, it came down to it, right? There was a big buildup. A match was announced. The match was the immortal Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior, champion versus champion, title for title, babyface versus babyface. Now, why is that important? It's probably not too controversial today, but in those days, having a baby face versus another baby face was unheard of. You did not do that. It was always baby face versus heel. You did not hear about heel versus heel. You did not hear about baby face versus baby face. The way they can go ahead and do that today, and it's really not too big of an issue. It's really not too big of a deal. Yeah, it sparks a little bit of interest. It's like, orale, Holmes, you know, you got a face versus a face, or a heel versus a heel. And it does spark a little bit of interest. But back in these days, having two baby faces go at it was very unheard of, especially when you got two champions, when you got two guys that have the fan base in the palm of their hands. I mean, both of these guys were larger than life in the wrestling world at this time. So they went ahead and they decided, we're going to have these two guys go at it. So on April 1st, 1990, in the Sky Dome Arena in Ontario, Toronto, Canada, it happened. We're talking about the immortal Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior, champion versus champion, title for title. So whoever wins is going to be both WWF champion and Intercontinental champion. Again, something that is like mind-blowing at that time, right? It tell you the truth, it'll probably be mind-blowing today to have an Intercontinental champion and a WWE champion at the same time. Yeah, you know, it's a little unheard of. So, but this is back in 1990, man. This is all completely mind-blowing. This right here was completely trumping all the other main events. When we're talking about the anticipation, now I know some people might come in and say like, hey, wait a second, man, Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant. I got it, but that was babyface versus a heel giant. I'm not saying this was better. What I'm saying, the build up, the lead up to this, something that we've never seen or ever heard of before was happening. And this build up was bigger probably than any other match, especially if you're talking about that time, that era. The build up to this match stood alone. So the match is taking place, right? And I'm not really going to break down the match. All I'm really going to say is that these two guys were not the best in-ring performers, okay? Wrestling, you got to understand, wrestling at that time was just basically focusing on bodybuilders to just go in there and perform, right? Today, you got guys like Brock Lesnar, you got guys like Bobby Lashley, you got huge guys, but that can actually go in there and be athletic and show their athleticism and the agility that they bring to the ring and more wrestling skills. Back then, these guys move a lot more slower. They're, like I said, they're basically just bodybuilders that you put in the ring to try to perform to the best of their ability. And to the best of their ability was not much when you compare it to what it is today. Today is so much different. You got big guys doing some crazy maneuvers and showing off just crazy athleticism. So ultimately, guys, the Ultimate Warrior comes out with the victory. He becomes Intercontinental champion along with the WWF champion. Now, here's what I want to say. Going back to this match, okay? What I am asking is the build-up leading up to this match. Now, I can think of quite a few matches that there was a big build-up, right? You had The Rock versus Hulk Hogan. You have John Cena versus The Rock. You have Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels, WrestleMania 12. You have a lot of matches that there was a big build-up. HBK versus The Undertaker, WrestleMania 25. You have a lot of big matches that have a nice big lead-up, right? I don't think any of them beat this one. Maybe some come close, and maybe some of you guys may disagree, and that's all right. But if you guys were around at that time, the buildup to this match was just beyond belief. We've had some big buildups, and I'm not saying that we haven't, because we have. But this one, to me, in my opinion, still stands alone. With some of them, with some other matches being just right there, right behind them. Okay, I'm not going to say it's no competition. There's definitely competition of the buildup and the lead up to a certain main event. But to me, this one is at the top. And we could talk about this one's 1, and the next one doesn't have to be number 2. It could be number 1A, because there are some big matches out there where the buildup was really there. Obviously, the in-ring performance and the type of match I'm not talking about, because this one does not match up with any of those matches. It doesn't even come close. But here's what I do want to talk about as well. Then I'll go ahead and ask you guys the question, is that I had never seen a fan base, or the fans, right? Because they weren't known as the WWE Universe back then as they're known as today. I'd never seen the fans so split down the line, 50-50, like I have for this match. When you had Rock versus Hogan, most fans were rooting for Hogan. When you had John Cena versus Rock, most fans were rooting for The Rock. When you had HBK versus Bret Hart, most fans were rooting for HBK. Now, the only one that I can possibly think of, homie, is WrestleMania 25, where you had HBK versus The Undertaker. That one right there, I'm going to say most fans were probably rooting for The Undertaker, but HBK definitely had a lot of fans behind him. And I'm going to say that one was probably more like 60-40 in favor of Undertaker. But see, this match right here with the Warrior versus Hogan, I can't tell you who had the bigger fan base. If you guys watch that match, and again, prepare yourselves because you're not going to be highly entertained. But if you look at the arena, if you look at the Sky Dome, you see the fan bases in there. You cannot tell who is getting a better pop, who the fans are rooting for more. As a kid, I would run into a lot of kids that were rooting for Hogan, and I would run into a lot of kids that were rooting for Warrior. I couldn't tell you who was rooting for who more. When I went to go watch it, my mom used to work for Pioneer Chicken back in the 80s, and her boss was going to go ahead and have WrestleMania VI, and they invited us, and my mom had to work, so she just dropped us off there. And even inside that home, right, he got there with he had his family there, and not that I took count, but it just seemed like it was half and half. Maybe it wasn't exactly half and half, but in that home, you had quite a few rooting for Warrior. You had quite a few rooting for Hogan. And till this day, I cannot think of a match that just had the fan base split down the middle so evenly. Like I said, the only one that I can think of that comes close to it is HBK versus Undertaker WrestleMania 25. But even that, this one takes the cake, man, when we're talking about 50-50 down the middle. So I just kind of want to go ahead and ask the question. Were you guys team Warrior or were you guys team Hogan, and why? Now, we're not going to talk about what happened with their careers. Obviously, we knew there was some real animosity there between the two, and Ultimate Warrior went off and had a much shorter career and more of a tragic career because his career actually ended up kind of bad and sad. Hulk Hogan actually blew up and had an amazing career, a much, much, much better career than the Ultimate Warrior did. And it's sad because I was a big Ultimate Warrior fan. I was a Hulk Hogan fan as well. Now, for me personally, I was rooting for the Ultimate Warrior. I was a little bit more of a bigger fan of Warrior than I was for Hulk Hogan leading up to this match. So I was really rooting for Warrior. I do want to say this. When Ultimate Warrior did win the title, when he won, when he beat Hulk Hogan, I didn't hear any boos. The feel was kind of like, you know what? I'm okay with either one of these guys winning. I'm going to cheer. Whoever wins, I'm going to stand up and cheer for them. And that's something that I've never really felt before. or not before, till this day, as a matter of fact. You kind of root for your guy, and maybe you might give respect for the match and the performance that they put in the ring. But man, again, I'm not talking about the match itself. I'm talking about the buildup and just how it had the fans just so divided, so evenly. Team Warrior, Team Hogan, and I've yet to see something like that. But man, that's all I really got for you guys today. You guys let me know. Were you guys Team Warrior? Were you guys Team Hogan? Were you able to see who had the bigger fan base there in the Sky Dome? Because Ultimate Warrior came in and he got his fan base on really quick. And it was a big main event, the biggest main event. I mean, that main event trumps a lot of WrestleMania main events when we're just talking about the characters. The match itself is something completely different. I'm just talking about two larger than life characters in the wrestling world. So you guys let me know. Were you Warrior or were you Hogan? Hey, shout outs to all my wrestling junkies out there. Gracias for tapping into Wrestling Rehab. And we know that you are a wrestling junkie. That's why we'll be back with some more Wrestling Rehab.